All right, folks, in this video, I'm going to summarize a little bit about how fossils are formed and a little bit more about why fossils are actually extremely rare and some of the limitations on what would actually make a fossil. This slide here outlines what you're expected to know, but I'm going to go over it through the video, so if you'd like to pause it and review that, please feel free. Here are some key terms I want you to focus on as we move along through this presentation. So the main idea is really the conditions necessary to preserve a fossil are extremely unlikely. There are so many things that would limit the ability of a fossil to be created. And even, not even all types of organisms that have ever lived could be fossilized. So, and even the fossils that have been created, to retrieve them is also extremely rare. So let's review some of the details about why fossilization is so unlikely and some of the limitations, and learn a little bit about how fossils, are made. So in order for a fossil to form, the organism cannot be disturbed by a scavenger. So something that would eat it is very likely, so that would certainly limit the ability for an organism to fossilize. And then decomposition or decomposers such as bacteria or fungus will certainly, cause an organism to be, destroyed and not fossilized at all. So on top of that, besides being eaten and rotting away, they could easily be destroyed by erosional forces or weathering and other natural forces that would cause an organism to not fossilize. But the organisms that we do find, or parts of organisms that we find fossilized, are likely to be buried quickly and deeply. So I'll outline some of the ways that organisms are buried quickly and deeply and do fossilize. Here's a really simplified version of how an organism could be fossilized, and it's certainly not the only way, but maybe the dinosaur leaves footprints in the sand or mud, and then that mud will harden into stone and tell us a little bit about how the organism behaved. It dies near a water source. The hard parts like bones and teeth are left over. Sediments and water will bury it quickly and deeply, and then more sediments will create layers on top of it to preserve it, and then maybe thousands and millions of years later, natural forces will expose it, paleontologists will find it, and that organism will tell us a lot about what the Earth was like in the past. So that's not the only way organisms fossilize, but that is a really simplified version of how a fossil could be created. Some ways that organisms are buried quickly and deeply are, for example, in ice. They're extremely rare since the climate on Earth has changed so dramatically over the course of millions of years. But, here's an example of a woolly mammoth that was buried quickly and deeply in ice and was preserved perfectly and can tell us a lot about Earth's past. Insects being trapped in amber or tree sap is, fairly common. So these ancient insects, were in tree sap and got stuck, and then the tree sap hardens over time. And what's amazing about this is these are actually preserved, entire organisms that could be millions of years old. I mean, many of these are as old as the dinosaurs, which is where the premise of Jurassic Park came from. Maybe there's some dinosaur DNA in there that could be extracted and used for evil or capitalistic purposes. It's actually extremely common for organisms to get trapped in the mud and be buried quickly and deeply in peat bogs and swamps, and they will, preserve those organisms for long periods of time. There are examples of, large volcanic eruptions that bury, large areas quickly and deeply in volcanic ash. This is an example of Pompeii, where people are preserved in some awful positions. So you could tell they were kind of suffering, which is sad. But, not to be underestimated, being buried quickly and deeply in flash floods is a likely way that organisms could be buried quickly and deeply and preserve those organisms for long periods of time. So some of the things that might limit fossilization are simply, soft body parts, skin, muscles, fat, internal organs. They all deteriorate extremely quickly and just don't leave a trace. Fossils like this are, really rarely found. Here's an example of a cast. I kind of remember that because it's kind of popping out like an outcast. This shell, was buried quickly and deeply in mud and sediment that hardened over time into stone. The shell absorbed minerals from the water and became petrified into stone, and leaves a trace of what this organism was like in the past. So, really important concept is that some organisms just don't have hard body parts, so they are they may never be fossilized. Maybe jellyfish today just simply will never be fossilized because they don't have hard body parts that absorb the minerals and are readily fossilized. Here's an example of a mold fossil. You could see that's kind of an indentation. I sort of remember that by a jello mold. But what happened is this shell died and was buried quickly and deeply in mud and sediment. That this mud and sediment hardened over time, and the shell kind of rotted away over time and left this empty space here, which filled in with minerals to create the cast. And it leaves this, trace of what this organism, the shape of the organism was like in the past. If minerals are not, in the water for the shell to absorb, this process won't even take place, which would also limit, fossilization. So I quickly wanted to outline, some dinosaur bone fossilization, because generally we think of fossils as like bones and stuff. But fun fact is these are actually stones in the shape of a bone. Minerals absorbed into these dinosaur bones, millions of years ago. The bones and obviously the soft parts, rotted away, but the bones absorbed the minerals, and now you have stone in the shape of the dinosaur bones. So, the organism dies, it's buried rapidly and quickly, maybe in a flash flood. The soft tissues decompose, leaving just the bones and teeth. Minerals, this part right here is important. Minerals from the water absorb into the bones, teeth, or maybe, shells for sea creatures. Even the bones rot away, leaving only a petrified, which means like stone, in the shape of the dinosaur bones, teeth, or shells. So then hopefully the fossil becomes exposed to the surface and hopefully discovered. So there's many more fossils out there yet to be discovered, but these are actually stones in the shape of bones. So factors that actually help fossilization is obviously deep and rapid burial. That is a really important concept. Bones and teeth and shells more readily fossilized because they absorb those minerals and don't deteriorate. Volcanic ash, flash floods, swamps, amber, and ice are some common ways that organisms could be buried rapidly and deep. So fossilization is extremely rare, which makes the collection of fossils that we actually have quite remarkable. It just shows you how many organisms have existed over Earth's history, over millions and billions of years. So things that limit fossilization are actually quite a lot. Maybe the water doesn't have the correct minerals for bones to absorb, or maybe erosion breaks it down and carries it away, and natural forces like weathering would break it down, or even geologic events like earthquakes and those sorts of things could break fossils. Scavengers certainly would limit fossilizations. Organisms that eat those creatures before they even have the ability to fossilize. Decomposers rotting them away, such as bacteria, being buried, slowly and being exposed to the environment too long, or you're not buried deep enough to be preserved. And organisms that just don't even have hard body parts. You got skin, muscles, fats, and internal organs just simply will be very unlikely to fossilize at all. And maybe even entire taxonomic groups of organisms may never have fossilized from Earth's past. So in conclusion, the process of fossilization is extremely rare. There are many factors that limit the probability of an organism to be fossilized, which makes the collection of fossils we have around the world really extraordinary. There are things that aid in the fossilization process, which is always rapid and deep burial to preserve the organism. And where we're going with this is, fossils give us incredible clues to Earth's past. What were organisms like in the past? What are the similarities? What are the differences? What was the environment like in Earth's past? These are all tremendous things that fossils teach us. So I hope this lesson was helpful, and thanks for listening.